Hi, this is Paul Dini, and I'm thrilled to be here today to tell you about the first in the series of the Fleischer Superman cartoons. It was nominated for an Academy Award, and its competition for the award included The Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B by Walter Lantz, Hiawatha's Rabbit Hunt from Warner Brothers, How War Came by Columbia, The Night Before Christmas, an entry in the Tom and Jerry series, and Rhapsody in Rivets from Warner Brothers, and Truant Officer Donald from Walt Disney Productions. And it ultimately lost to Len DePauw from the Mickey Mouse series. The classic introduction, which goes faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, was actually written for the Fleischer cartoons. It was created by Jay Morton, who was a writer and artist for the Fleischer Studios. In addition to writing a lot of the better Superman stories, he also went on, this is kind of an interesting trivia fact, in later life to create the Pop-Top can, which made him a nice, tidy fortune.
Their civilization was far advanced and had brought forth a race of supermen whose mental and physical powers were developed to the absolute peak.
Here we see the origin of Superman according to the Fleischer cartoons. It takes us to the familiar planet Krypton, and longtime fans of Superman will notice some discrepancies between the cartoon origin of Superman and the comic book origin of Superman. For instance, while they do have him being rocketed to Earth in a spaceship, he is simply picked up by a passerby and dropped at an orphanage, which conflicts with the Ma and Pa Kent origin, where they raised him in Smallville all those years. A lot of what was to become legend about the character was still being established. Also, you have to figure that they only had 10 minutes to tell the cartoon story, and only a fraction of that could be devoted to his origin, so they had to use a big shorthand where that was concerned. So a lot of those seminal elements just had not even been created yet. It's interesting to note that a lot of those elements would come from different places. Elements like Jimmy Olsen and Kryptonite were devices that were used first in the radio series, which was running around this time, and gradually incorporated into Superman's overall mythology. All his enemies had either not been created or existed in very primitive form at this point. There was no Lex Luthor or Brainiac, or actually there was a Luthor in name only, but he had not become the scientist/billionaire we know today. The character in this cartoon, the mad scientist, is sort of a stand-in for Luthor. He's kind of a Luthor type, but all of Superman's major foes would come in the next 20 years, which is why none of them appear within the Superman Fleischer series.
Total destruction will come to those who laughed at me and failed to heed my warning. Beware, I strike at midnight. This nut may prove dangerous. Kent, you help Lois follow up her lead. She may have an angle on this thing.
Yes, sir.
But, Chief, I'd like the chance to crack the story on my own.
Well, no.
Thanks, Chief.
But, Lois...
Here we establish our lead characters, Superman, Clark Kent. Superman's voice was by Bud Collyer, who also played him on the radio, and Lois's voice was by Joan Alexander, who also played her on the radio, and we heard Jackson Beck earlier, who was a fine announcer and voiceover artist, doing the voice of the narrator. And for longtime Fleischer fans, here's another interesting voice. The mad scientist here has kind of a strange, almost comical tone to his voice in some of his readings, which isn't surprising as his voice is furnished by Jack Mercer, who also did the voice of Popeye, the Fleischer Studios' other star character. It's interesting in this cartoon that the Fleischers were trying something different from what they had done before. They were known primarily for humorous cartoons like Popeye and Betty Boop, also cartoons that used a lot of music. With Superman, it was really kind of a dramatic cartoon, and as you can tell by the stylization and the tone of the story, yet it's almost like they weren't quite sure how much the audience would accept a dramatic cartoon. Hence we have little characters like the scientist Buzzard here, who follows him around in every scene. And you can see him just a few seconds ago, he actually does cartoon antics when he's going into action. I think that they put that in as a way of reminding the audience it was still a cartoon and there was still an element of fun to be had with Superman. But I think they also figured out after this cartoon, they didn't need elements like that because Superman was such a powerful and compelling character, and the chemistry between Lois and Clark worked so well that the humorous aside characters really didn't work. They would try it occasionally, like they would put in like a goofy henchman or a wacky newsboy in some of the later cartoons, but they really didn't need them. In this cartoon, the buzzard doesn't really subtract to the action. He kind of almost doesn't fit, and it's actually good that he probably never has a scene with Superman himself. Snow White had come out a couple of years before this, and the Wicked Queen in that movie had a raven hench person, so I guess that had sort of become an industry standard at this point, is to stick in a little hench creature that could echo whatever the villain was doing. Lois Lane in this cartoon is not your typical animated heroine. In fact, I think she may be the first that actually takes a very active role in the action. She is not content to just be the tag-along girlfriend like most of the cartoon characters at that time. She is out actively seeking the story. She's flying toward the mad scientist's lair. She does get captured, but she does prove herself to be resourceful and capable throughout the cartoon. The animation in this cartoon is absolutely stunning. It was a milestone for its time, and it still is to this day. With all the superhero cartoons that have been produced for television and for feature films, nothing really has come close to this as far as its quality and its pacing and its design. There's an elegance to its design that is just amazing. It captures the power of the character, but it doesn't get weighed down in a lot of details. I really can't begin to count the ways that the Superman series had an influence on the Batman animated series and even on the Superman animated series, which were produced later by Warner Brothers. We studied these cartoons almost religiously and looked for ways to incorporate the same sense of storytelling and design and pacing, storyboarding, economy of dialogue into everything that we did onto Batman. We know that we couldn't top the Superman cartoons, nor did we even try. We just tried to find our own take on what they had done and incorporate it into what we were doing as best we could. Originally, the Fleischers did not want to produce this series because they had just finished their first feature, Gulliver's Travels, and they were deep into second production on their next feature, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, and they didn't want to commit themselves to another costly project. So when Paramount said, "What do you want to do the films?" they quoted them a figure of about $100,000, figuring, well, if they gave us the money, then we could do it. So ask for $100,000. They probably won't okay it. And they didn't, but they gave them $50,000, which was still at least 6 times the budget of your basic Popeye cartoon. So they said, well, if they're willing to commit, we're willing to try it. And they pulled out all the stops. It's really remarkable, the look of this cartoon. It really harkens back to 30s and 40s classic science fiction. The action had never been tried before in a cartoon like this, to give a full range of human motion and human reactions. Rotoscoping, which is the process of tracing animation drawings from live-action footage, was used throughout the cartoon on Superman and many of the human characters. But when it came to some of the big actions, like Superman flying or lifting a large object, they had no reference for that. So the Fleischer lead animators, who are actually more adept at comedy, would sketch in the action in a very rough fashion. And then their assistants and in-betweeners, who actually were trained in figure drawing, would keep Superman on model and in his heroic poses during most of the action sequences. The animated Superman series did wonders for increasing the visibility of the Superman character, and the comic book creators were quick to follow up on a good thing. In fact, there was a short comic book story produced around the same time as the Fleischer shorts that actually show Clark and Lois going to see one of the Superman cartoons. And the gag in the cartoon is that Clark has to keep Lois distracted during all the scenes which show that Superman is actually Clark Kent because he doesn't want her figuring out his secret identity. I don't know how he was able to hide his identity from everybody else watching the cartoon, but I guess you weren't supposed to think about it all that clearly. In the case of the Fleischers, I think they took a good idea, which was Superman in the comics, and just made it an amazing idea. You had a lot of people reading the comic books, but when you could go to the movie theater and see Superman in action, that really redefined who the character was and really set him in the public's mind as this bright, strong, positive hero. And also the theme by Sammy Timberg is just great. He was the first to really do what a lot of composers who followed him would do, and that is, in just about every interpretation of Superman, you can almost hear the word Superman in the title theme. So that bass line at the beginning, bum, 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 you can almost imagine that as Superman. And everybody from John Williams to Shirley Walker has gone back to use that as their signature theme.
Congratulations, Lois. That was a great scoop.
Yes, Chief, thanks to Superman.
And there it is, that knowing wink to the camera, letting us know that all is well, the world is saved again. This is Paul Dini saying goodbye.